everything is urgent, then nothing is important. You are not building a business, you are amplifying fragility. Revenue hides inefficiency, profit tells the truth. The real problem for most founders is usually the one they are avoiding in their business. No one's going to step in and save you, no one's going to do this for you. Welcome back, guys. I am Daniel Thompson, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a multi-business founder and I'm a chartered wealth manager. I've been in business now for nearly 15 years, sadly, and I have built, scaled, exited, restarted, shut down businesses, and at this point in time I feel like I've made most mistakes typical founders could make, and I'm sure in the future I will make many more. But here's the real talk. Most of the advice you hear about business is typically incomplete, or it only works at a certain stage of business. And what I want to do is basically compress 15 years worth of my business knowledge, the hard lessons I've learned, the only lessons you kind of learn when money, people, expectations, real pressure is involved, into this video. And there's no hype, there's no hacks, they're just lessons I've had to learn the hard way. So let's get into it. So the first one is sell to the right people first. It sounds so simple, but it's one of the biggest mistakes that I see founders make. They're trying to help everyone early on. And this is something I teach founders and new wealth managers who are coming into the industry, focus on a niche. Early on in my career, I learned this the hard way because I was pitching low-level services to people who had really high expectations that nearly broke me both financially and mentally. And the reality is, if someone pays less sometimes, not all the time of course, the higher their expectations tend to be relative to their situation. So as an example, when someone pays £100, that can be a meaningful amount of money to them. However, if someone pays you £5,000, and this isn't obviously true of everyone, but for some people it can barely register, and the relationship with the money or even service can be entirely different. And this is true in business just as much as it is with my wealth management firm, because some of the clients I work with that have the highest amount of assets with me, the largest portfolios, can actually be some of the easiest to deal with. But yes, their portfolios, the services they need can be more complex, it can be more time consuming, which 9 times out of 10 it normally is, but they can also actually be the easiest clients to deal with. What that has done is that has helped me mold my service over time and niche specifically with certain type of clientele, both in my wealth management business and my other businesses. And the big takeaway I want you to take from here is that solving problems for people who value time over money is what gives you margin, because the margin is what actually gives you breathing room to actually do better work. So most founders, they don't have a knowledge problem, they have a priority problem. And the funny thing is I never meet founders really who have a lack of information, because they are normally swamped, they're drowning in it. And I've been there myself, information flow and the amount of emails or WhatsApps or work that gets thrown your way sometimes as a business owner can be overwhelming, to say the least. But what I find founders often lack is clarity on what actually matters right now. So over a decade of working with business owners, high-level execs, corporates, I've seen founders running multiple businesses, side projects, partnerships, all while they're kind of half alive on limited energy, while one core asset could have completely changed their lives. So let me kind of anchor this for you, because strategy isn't ideas. Strategy is deciding what gets ignored. So another big one is the founder is normally the biggest constraint. I did a video similar to this going back a few weeks ago. Your business typically as a founder is constrained by you until you fix that problem. And most businesses don't stall because of the market or because of their product. They stall because their growth is limited by the founder themselves. Like I said, been personally guilty of this myself in my own business, and still am to a degree. I'm still trying to get out of my own way. I'm still trying to create processes, systems, SOPs to remove the friction within my business or businesses even. And I'm constantly playing almost like a game of strategy with myself, trying to remove myself as a founder operationally from my businesses. And the thing is, if I don't solve this, I become the constraint. I stop the business from scaling. The business doesn't grow. And early days, I was doing everything myself, because you don't know any different, as a early stage founder, as an early stage business owner. And as I become more experienced over time, I realized leadership, hiring, delegation were the real constraints. I had to be doing these things. And moving from an operator to an owner and a builder of teams and a leader. And the moment I stopped asking, what should I do next, and started asking who needs to exist in my business that doesn't yet exist or work within the business, is when everything changed. Because what I realized is you need the right people in the right seats, and typically sooner than you realize you need them. So a big one I've learned over the years building multiple businesses is that average teams create complex rules and great teams don't even need the rules. If your business needs a lot of rules, you normally are compensating for low standards in your business, and let that sink in for a moment, right? Great people do not need micromanagement. They need clarity, they need trust, they need accountability. And this applies in business just as much as it does so in your environment. The best example I can give you is in the Founder Game community. You know, the consultancy I run, the community of 7, 8, 9, 10-figure founders, you're surrounded by high-level operators, people moving, operating at a different frequency, and your baseline rises automatically, and you don't settle for mediocrity. So one of the biggest mistakes that I often see founders make, and a tough lesson I had to learn, is don't chase scale before you've earned it, because headcount grows, costs grow, complexity grows, but sometimes quality doesn't follow. And every single business I've seen, almost without exception, that has won big has been obsessed with being better first. So better products, better service, better systems, processes, and then the growth naturally follows as a result. And this is exactly the same mistake, funny enough, I see people make when it comes to investing. People who chase returns without managing risk destroy capital. And business is no different. You know, when you chase revenue without strong margins or operational efficiency or repeatable delivery or the right systems or processes in place, you are not building a business, you are amplifying fragility. And I've seen founders, funny enough, who have doubled their revenue but halved their quality of life and have made less profit. More clients, more fires, less control, and that's not growth, that is dilution. And bigger businesses aren't by default automatically better. It's better to build something calm, tight, and high quality, and only scale when the foundations are in, they're solid, and they can carry the weight. Right, so the next lesson is a really good one and one of my favorite ones. You know, deep work is a huge competitive advantage that most founders refuse to protect, because if everything is urgent, then nothing is important, right? And most founders live in reaction mode. They're dealing with constant emails, messages, meetings, noise, and it may feel productive, but it isn't. And from my own experience, the work that actually moves the needle is done in silence, and you've got to take that time for yourself. And as an example, you know, mornings for me involve deep work, and they are non-negotiable. That's when strategy is built, that is when decisions are made, that is when real progress happens across my businesses. And it only works if I defend that time religiously, and that means setting boundaries, you know, with my team, with clients, and even with yourself. So whether it's morning training or no constant checking of your inbox or no screens late into the evening, you need time to think. And if you don't create space and step back, what can happen is you can spend years climbing the wrong ladder only to get to the top and realize it's leaning against the wrong wall. And the highest leverage work you can do in your business is rarely, often urgent. And that's exactly why most founders never do it, and why the ones who do it pull away quietly. So most people get this next one so wrong. You know, brand, just like reputation, is built slowly, but it can pay forever. And it's not about logos, it's not about colors, it's not about the number of followers. And we're talking here about a company brand or personal brand. It's what people expect from that company or that individual before they even show up. Brand is built on trust. It's built through consistent delivery. It's built through doing what you said you're going to do. It's built through showing up when it matters. Quiet excellence over time. And that applies to your content, it applies to your business, it applies to your long-term positioning. And you just can't shortcut trust. You've got to earn it slowly and let it quietly compound. And when people trust you, price becomes secondary, surprisingly. Relationships last longer, opportunities come to you, and that's what creates real leverage. And trends may change, algorithms may change, but reputation doesn't. So build something reliable, let it speak for you. Your brand, just like your reputation, compounds quietly. However, it can pay forever. So another big mistake that I often see founders make is they confuse revenue with the strength of their business. And high revenue can often make founders feel safe, but it's not the truth. Revenue hides inefficiency, profit tells the truth. And I've worked with businesses that are doing millions of pounds that were extremely fragile because they were overly complex, overstaffed, over-leveraged, and only one bad quarter away from being in real trouble because their revenue is masking things like weak pricing or poor cost control or bad structure within the business. business, but profit exposes it all. This is really true when it comes to investing, and so obvious, because if a portfolio is not built correctly and volatility hits, it gets exposed and you can see what's broken. With businesses, it is no different. So the strongest founders I know, they stop chasing top line milestones and revenue figures and start building businesses with real margins, predictable cash flows, the ability to survive shocks when we have economic crisis, for example. And turnover only really feeds ego. Profit is what builds longevity. And if you want to scale, you want to build your business, you want to step away one day or even sell, you have to stop asking how much revenue I'm making and start asking how strong is my business. So this next one is literally one of my favorites, and I know I keep saying that, but this is actually, I promise you, my favorite one. So the real problem for most founders is usually the one they are avoiding in their business, because founders are really good at solving problems that they enjoy, right? So they refine their product, they tweak the branding, play around with the marketing, optimize systems that already work, and they quietly avoid the one issue that actually matters. And the problem that keeps resurfacing is the one that you haven't faced properly. And if something isn't working in your business, whether it's sales, people, margins, or the culture, it's rarely a small fix. And that's me talking from experience. I've had to solve some problems in my own business that have taken me 1 or 2 years to resolve, a massive restructuring in the business. It usually involves confrontation or a really hard decision or an uncomfortable conversation with someone or a fundamental change in the business that you've been delaying that has a massive impact. So this is the job of a founder, the job of an entrepreneur, and it's not easy because as a founder, you don't get to outsource the worst problems. Sadly, you get the ability to deal with the worst ones. And by default, they land with you, because they are typically the hardest to solve. That's why they end up with you. And no one's going to step in and save you. No one's going to do this for you. Identify the real constraint. That is the key point. You've got to get to the problem, identify the constraint as soon as possible and deal with it, and then move on to the next one. And that is how progress actually happens. Right guys, so the last point I want to leave you with is this. Community isn't a bonus, it's a force multiplier, because one thing that I wish I learned earlier on in my career, earlier on in business, is that I wish I'd had earlier proximity to other serious founders, other people who are operating at the same level as me, not surface level networking, but real world conversations with people playing the same game as me. Because the right room compresses time. You see mistakes before they happen and before you make them. You raise your standards without forcing it. And I wish I understood the significance of this years ago. And now it's something I live and breathe. And it's even easier being out here in Dubai because there's more and more people who are operating at a higher frequency. And the Founder Game community, the community that I recently launched off the back of my consultancy firm, now exists because I wanted to build that exact room, that exact group of people that I wish I had access to 10 years ago. Well guys, if there's one thing I have learned, it's that building something meaningful takes time. You need to focus on quality, you need to protect your energy, you need to hire people who are better than yourself, and you need to stop pretending that busy means that you're making progress, because that's the real game.